Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias a todos, and welcome to the 7th Annual Chesapeake Children's Book Festival. Please give a round of applause to Love That Jazz Band. My name is Christina Acosta, and I am the Communications Manager at the library. For the past 7 years, the Chesapeake Children's Book Festival has evolved into an event that has impacted the children of the Eastern Shore. We have given families the opportunities to not enjoy only a wide selection of children's books and illustrations, but to also become aware of all of the local communities that make Talbot County whole. I'd like to begin by thanking the members of the Chesapeake Children's Book Festival Committee. You have worked many long hours to make this festival possible, and for the very generous support of the Friends of the Talbot County Free Library. Today would not be possible without you. Thank you to all of our authors and community partners for being a part of this major event to celebrate the kickoff of the summer reading program. I want to give a special thank you to Tim Young, noted children's author and illustrator and creator of the Chesapeake Children's Book Festival, our graphic artist for this year's festival and one of the featured authors today. I also want to give a huge thank you to Flying Cloud Booksellers as well as Blue Point Hospitality. Sharon Gottmer, who is the store manager of the Flying Cloud Bookseller, who is also here today, and also Julia Foxwell, the community liaison of Blue Point Hospitality. Thank you so much for providing 350 book vouchers valued at $20 apiece to celebrate children signing up for the Summer Reading Book Festival, for the book program, And the Maryland Public Television partners with CCBF and Maryland Public Libraries across the state. Randy Farmer O'Connor, Managing Director, Corporate Support for providing promotion and building new important partnerships in our community and across the state. What's Up Media, Talbot County Council for their ongoing and generous support of CCBF as well as the library. Talbot County Arts Council for their Community Arts Development Grant for CCBF and their continuing support of the library and community arts organizations across the county. To our wonderful community partners who have come to join us today in this celebration. Academy of Art Museum, Critchlow Atkins, Chesapeake Multicultural Resource Center, Imagination Library, Judy Center, Shore Rivers, University of Maryland Horn Point Laboratories, and the YMCA. Please stop by their tables and say hi. They have some wonderful giveaways and information about their organizations. And last but certainly not least, to all of the library staff and volunteers who are here with us today and stepped up to the challenge of not only this event, but other library events. You have worked many long hours to make today and every day a success. Now I'd like to bring up the legendary library guy, our very own Bill Peak, who will be introducing our first keynote speaker. Take it away, library guy.
She forgot to mention my Nobel Prize in Literature, but oh well. You know, the lessons I learned from the books my mother and father read to me when I was a child were what you would expect. B.D. Bear taught me there's no place like home. The Borrowers showed me that being little doesn't mean you're unimportant. And The Cat in the Hat taught me the English language was capable of unimaginable and unimaginably funny somersaults and pirouettes. But today's keynote speakers have different lessons to teach us. Lessons about American history and American heroes that in many cases have been left out of our textbooks. Our first keynote speaker is Maryland native and Newbery Honor winner Carol Boston Weatherford. Hailed by Huffington Post as a master of picture book nonfiction, and she certainly is, Ms. Weatherford is the author of over 50 books, including 3 Caldecott Honor winners, Freedom in Congo Square, Voice of Freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer's Spirit of the Civil Rights Movement, Moses, When Harriet Tubman Led Her People to Freedom. I've already bought a copy and had her sign it. And the Coretta Scott King honor book, Becoming Billie Holiday. Her poetry, nonfiction, historical fiction, and biographies focus on heritage, culture, and social justice. And I'm very proud to add that she did some of the research for some of her books right here in our Maryland Room archive at the Talbot County Free Library. Ms. Weatherford holds an MA in Publications Design from the University of Baltimore and an MFA in Creative Writing from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. She is a professor of English at Fayetteville State University in North Carolina. She has won 2 of North Carolina's highest civilian honors, the Reagan Rubin Award for Outstanding North Carolina Writers and the North Carolina Award for Literature. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, a warm round of applause, please, for Carol Boston Weatherford.
Good morning. Let me get you to repeat after me. Poetry, makes music, with words. And that's going to be the theme of my presentation. I'm going to do a little telling, some showing, and you're going to be helping me to share these poems, and then we'll get through. I do want to acknowledge that some of my neighbors are here, Mike Milkey, and Harriet Lowry, and my family's here on the back row. And my story kind of starts with family because I've been writing since I was 6 years old. Made up my first poem when I was in first grade, announced to my mom on the ride home from school that I had made up a poem, and then said, there are 4 seasons in each year, winter, summer, spring, and fall. Which one do you like best of all? I like winter. That's when the wind gives its pleasant call. My mom was so shocked that she parked the car, even though we were just 2 blocks from home, asked me if I could say the poem again, and when I said it the second time, she wrote it down. As luck would have it, or as God planned it, my dad was a high school printing teacher, meaning he had printing presses in his classroom. So my mom later asked my father, I was probably in 2nd or 3rd grade by that time, if he would print some of my early poems on the printing press in his classroom. So he used my poems as typesetting exercises for his students, and the students printed them on the letterpress in the classroom. So in the 1960s, before the dawn of any of the digital technology that we now take for granted, and digital natives don't know anything about printing presses probably, but I got to see my work in print, and it was a huge thrill for me. I did not dream at that time of becoming an author. I loved to read. I loved to write poetry. I had no idea that the people who were writing the books that I so loved to read were, number 1, alive, and number 2, getting paid to do that work. So it didn't dawn on me until I was out of college. You know, you're not supposed to figure out what you want to do in college. You just spend your parents' money. So after I got out of college, I decided I wanted to be a poet, and here I am. So let me share another poem. I'm going to share a nursery rhyme. It's called Jazz Baby. And would you hold up the book? Because I don't actually have the book, but I do have it on my phone. When I point to you like this, you're going to say, jazz baby, jazz baby. When I say hands, you're going to clap twice. When I say horn, you're going to play the air trumpet or saxophone. When I say drum, you're going to use 2 hands and pound the drum on your lap. You'll hear me say tap your feet. You can do that. You'll hear me say snap your fingers. You can do that. This is swing and sway. This is shake and shimmy, also jiggle wiggle. And this is all night long. All right, so when I And you can remember all that, right? Kids can do it all the time. I have kids do it. Kids remember this stuff. Okay, so when I point to you, it's jazz baby, jazz baby.
Jazz baby, jazz baby.
Join the band. You've got music in your hands.
Jazz baby, jazz baby.
Blow your horn. You've got rhythm, sure as you're born.
Jazz baby, jazz baby.
Tap your feet. Snap your fingers. Happy beat.
Jazz baby, jazz baby.
Pound your drum. Hear it thump thump. Rum-a-tum-tum.
Jazz baby, jazz baby.
Swing and sway. Shake and shimmy. Dance all day.
Jazz baby, jazz baby.
Strike those keys. Make them plink plink if you please.
Jazz baby, jazz baby.
Cut a rug. Jiggle wiggle. Jitterbug.
Jazz baby, jazz baby.
Where was I? The only thing, when notifications pop up on the phone, they take over. Jazz baby, jazz. We did strike those keys. Cut a rug. Jiggle wiggle. Jitterbug. I think we did that one. Come on, phone. Jazz baby. Oh, it's jazz baby, jazz baby. Sorry. Pluck those strings till that big bass sizzles sings.
Jazz baby, jazz baby.
Hippity hop. Bounce and boogie. Repeat after me. Bebop de bop.
Jazz baby, jazz baby.
Hum a song. That's not it. Let it. Yeah, it is. Jazz baby, jazz baby. Come on. Hum a song. Let it rock you all night long. Yeah, this phone's not going to cooperate. All right. So a little more telling. So I've written, I think, 5 books that are set in or about people from Maryland. So I'm just going to pull a few of them out to show you. I'm not going to necessarily share all these books. Probably my most popular book set in Maryland is Moses, when Harriet Tubman led her people to freedom. And it's a retelling of Harriet Tubman's first escape. And the story unfolds through 3 voices: Harriet's voice, God's voice, and the narrator's voice. And of course, some of the things that Harriet said were actually quoted from her narrative that was published, I think, in the mid-19th century. The narrator's voice I had to invent, and of course, God's voice I had to invent, but I guess it was okay because I haven't been struck by lightning yet. Also, about an Eastern Shore person, By and By, Charles Albert Tindley, the father of gospel music, which is illustrated by Brian Collier, and he may hold this book up later. I don't think he's going to read it. I won't either, but I'll read just the beginning. It's really a story not only about a gospel hymn writer and about his ministry, but it's a story about literacy and lifelong learning. And so it starts off, my life is a sermon inside a song. I'll sing it for you. Won't take long. Berlin, Maryland, 1851. Charles and Hester had a son. Father enslaved, but mother free. The law spared me from slavery. And so it goes on to tell how Tindley taught himself to read by collecting scraps of newspapers and lighting pine knots at night for light to learn the alphabet and then eventually learn words and learn how to read. So let me get to my hometown of Baltimore. Becoming Billie Holiday is about, of course, the jazz singer, and I was really pleased to hear the jazz band in the auditorium. If you haven't heard it, wander in there so you can hear some music. And it is a series of poems about Billie Holiday's first 25 years in Baltimore, where she was raised. She was actually born in Philadelphia, where her mother worked as a maid, but she was raised in Baltimore and then went on to Harlem with her mom and, of course, became famous in Harlem. So it's about her life up to the time that she recorded her signature song, Strange Fruit, and it's illustrated by Floyd Cooper. I've got 2 other books about Baltimoreans, and I don't actually have the book. This is just the F&G, folded and gathered. The Faith of Elijah Cummings, The North Star of Equal Justice, about the late congressman. And also about another congressperson, I've got Madam Speaker, Nancy Pelosi calls the House to order. So I think those are all my Maryland books. So let's do some more poetry. Let's see what I want to do next. Well, I think I'm going to do, I had planned to do like all musical poetry, but I want to do this one about Harriet Tubman. And when I wrote Moses, it was not the first time that I had written about Harriet Tubman. I first published a poem about her in my book, Remember the Bridge, Poems of a People. And Harriet Tubman was one of my early heroes because I had to learn about her in elementary school. And, you hear about her over and over again if you go through any public school system or probably any school period in Maryland. So I'm going to get you to help me with this one. When you hear me say howling, you're going to howl like bloodhounds. When you hear me say run, you're going to use your arms. You can use your legs, too, to pretend that you're running. When you hear me say blowing, you're going to whistle. When you hear me say chains and shackles, if you have some keys, just shake them for me. And this is steal away. This is North Star. And I think that's all you need to know. The conductor was a woman. This line ain't got no tracks. This road ain't got no rails. Bloodhounds a howlin', hunting for her trail. The stations are hideouts. The conductor holds a gun. She stops at each plantation for slaves on the run. Hear her whistle blowing. Hoot owl, I forgot to tell you to hoot like owls. Hoot owl at break of dawn. Loose those chains and shackles. Got keys. Rattle, rattle, rattle. Tell not a soul you're gone. Steal away with rags upon your back. Run until your bare feet bleed. Her train won't jump the track. Won't let nobody turn her round. She's been through fire and rain. The North Star was the headlight on her freedom train. And that's it for the phone. I'm retiring this right now. So I've got a few poems about music, specifically about jazz. And as I was looking at the books that I had on display, it dawned on me that I probably need to write some more books about music. I write a lot of biographies, and some of them are about musical figures. But that's really, even though I like history, I really love musical history. And I love to write about music. And I think when I was talking to you and we talked about how addictive the book Jazz Baby is, I said, I think I need to do more of that. So I'm going to share with you this one musical poem that does not rhyme. And it's called Before John Was a Jazz Giant, a song of John Coltrane. And I like to write about subjects that have to do with places that I live. And so I raised my family in High Point, North Carolina, which is where John Coltrane was raised. So when I point to you like this, you're going to say, before John was a jazz giant. And okay, you've got to, like a ham bone knocking in a pot, you've got to, whenever you hear me say anything about a horn, you're going to play the air saxophone, because he was a saxophone player. You'll hear me say giggling, you'll giggle. You'll hear me say whistling, you'll whistle. When I say Sunday sermons, you're going to say amen. When you hear me say sobs, you can cry. When you hear me say big bands on the radio, you can snap your fingers. And the very last line in the book is, he was all ears. I'd like for you to point to your ears and just repeat after me, he was all ears. So before John was a jazz giant is your recurring line. So you ready? Before John, this is your line actually.
Before John was a jazz giant.
He heard ham bones knocking in grandma's pots. Daddy strumming a ukulele, and Mama cranking the phonograph. He heard steam engines whistling past, Cousin Mary giggling at jitterbuggers, and Bojangles tap dancing in the picture show. He heard Grandpa's Sunday sermons. Amen. Mama playing hymns for the senior choir, and the Scoutmaster's call to join a band. He heard birds warbling at sunrise. Can you make a bird sound for me? The sobs of kinfolk at family funerals and cheers as he marched in parades. He heard big bands on the radio and a saxophone's soulful solo, blue notes crooning his name. He picked up that horn, blew into the mouthpiece, pressed his fingers on the keys, and breathed every sound he'd ever known into a bold new song. He was all ears. So this was illustrated by Sean Qualls, and just a little Easter egg about this book, about the creative process behind the book. I wanted the book to kind of riff like a horn, and so the narrator is supposed to be a horn. So. Jazz Baby is one of my shorter books, one of my shortest. It's also the book that probably took the least amount of time to write, or maybe almost the least amount of time to write. So I wrote Jazz Baby over a period of a couple weeks. I was teaching a class for adults in writing children's literature and had assigned to my students to write a nursery rhyme. And I said, well, I'll write one too. So Jazz Baby is supposed to be a jazz patty cake. Now, when Aretha Franklin passed away in 2018, someone sent me an email, another poet, someone who writes for children, said, you need to write an Aretha Franklin biography. That is all. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I mean, you know, it felt like ambulance chasing or something. I'm not doing that. So, and I said, everybody's going to be doing it, so I'm definitely not going to do it. And then there was a tweet. Someone tweeted, "These are the top 3 people we'd like to do a book, a biography of Aretha Franklin." And of course, my name was one of them. I'm like, I called my agent at that point. I said, "You think I should write a book about Aretha Franklin?" He said, "Yeah, you should." I'm like, I'm not doing that. And then I sat through the 5-hour funeral it was on television. And I asked my boyfriend, I said, "You think I should write a book about Aretha Franklin?" He said, "Yeah, you should absolutely do it." And the next day, I decided I was going to do it, and I had kind of figured out in my head how I wanted to do it. So it is structured, it's a riff on her song, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. My dad was a huge Aretha Franklin fan, so I grew up on her music. And it was easy for me to write it because I felt like I knew her. I didn't know every aspect of her biography, but it's like Before John Was a Jazz Giant. It's kind of an unbiography. It doesn't cover every little thing that ever happened to her. And, nor did I want to do that. So what I did was I made a list of words. At the top of the list was R-E-S-P-E-C-T. And I had decided that I wanted each stanza to start with a word that ended with a letter of the alphabet that made the long E sound. So, that pretty much narrowed down, certain letters of the alphabet, P, D being one of them, C. It had to be, because the words are going to be spelled out. Even for kids who can't read yet, they can spell out these, the hyphenated words that begin each page. So I'm going to read it, and I think you get so the spelled out words kind of serve as signposts along her journey, or guide you through her character. So I'm going to go ahead and read it, and I'm going to try to. May I get some help with turning these pages? That way I can just hold the. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. And so if you want to, I don't know if you can see the words or not. I'll just read them. If you want to join, then you can. If you can actually see the words. And it's illustrated by Frank Morrison, and he won a Coretta Scott King Award last year for that. Blessed, cradled by the church, rocked by an ebony sea. Aretha says a little prayer each night on bended knee. Detroit, the Franklins move north from Memphis, Tennessee. They put down roots and rise like a mighty tree. Music, hand-clapping gospel, the Franklins' pedigree. Parents, children, praise the Lord in stirring harmony. Strife. Clarence and Barbara Franklin can't seem to agree. Daddy wasn't faithful, so Mama chose to flee. Gifted, young, gifted black, Aretha hears a melody. Then she plays the tune by ear, plinking perfectly. Example, her preacher father fights for rights in his community. Other leaders visit to voice a common plea. Talent, young Aretha's solos soar with artistry. Her wise father senses his daughter's destiny. Debut, 14, recording live and nervous as can be. She cuts a gospel album, gives God the victory. Voice, Aretha's voice resounds with color and clarity. Spanning 4+ octaves, the maestros all agree. Groove, Aretha finds her groove when she's rocking R&B. No woman of her time has more chart toppers than she. RIGHT, for the civil rights movement for racial equality, Aretha raises funds and gives concerts for free. And that's actually one of the things that was little known about Aretha Franklin, that she was an activist. Someday, we'll all be free. GREAT, Aretha's crowned as Queen of Soul, our own royalty. She wins awards and accolades and more than 1 degree. PROUD, when the first black president is sworn into history, the Queen rejoices with My Country 'Tis of Thee. Sweet Land of Liberty. HUMBLE, the Queen tours her queendom from sea to shining sea, but in Detroit, down to earth, she's known just as Riri. RESPECT, the Queen of Soul blessed us with a golden legacy, but she would probably call it, and I quote, the gift that God gave me. Thank you. Thank you. So how are we doing for time? How are we doing for time? Okay, oh, we got plenty of time. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple more then. All right, so this next one, I'll give you a little backstory about this one. Freedom in Congo Square was a book that was pitched to me by an editor. Most of the time I come up with my own ideas, but once you're known in the industry, you get known for a certain type of thing. Well, she writes books about musical subject matter. Well, we want a book about Congo Square. And so an editor came to me and said, would you write a book about Congo Square? And, I was hungry, so yeah, sure, I'll write a book about Congo Square. And I really didn't know what it was. Maybe I had heard of it. I think I had heard of it at the time, probably from the Ken Burns jazz series. So Congo Square is a place in New Orleans. It's part of the Louis Armstrong National Historic Site. And it is a place outside of the Treme neighborhood in New Orleans where enslaved people could go on Sundays. Louisiana, was a Catholic state during the colonial period and early America. And on Sundays, Sunday afternoons, they even gave the enslaved people time off. And unlike other places in the South where enslaved people were not allowed to gather without a white person present and were not allowed to play drums and practice other African traditions, in New Orleans, they were allowed to do that at Congo Square on Sunday afternoons. So while I was talking on the phone with this editor, I actually came up with the idea. I didn't tell her at the time, because you don't want to make it look too easy, that I came up with this idea to write a concept book about slavery and to make this a countdown of the days of the week that showed not only the relentless labor involved in being enslaved, but also the celebration and rejoicing that took place on Sunday afternoons in Congo Square. So whenever you hear me say a number word, like 6, that'll be the first one you hear, you're going to say, more days to Congo Square. Mondays, there were hogs to slop, mules to train, and logs to chop. Slavery was no ways fair. 6 more days to Congo Square. Tuesdays, there were cows to feed, fields to plow and rows to seed. A moment without work was rare. 5. Wednesdays, there were beds to make, silver to shine, and bread to bake. The dreaded lash, too much to bear. 4. Thursdays, there were clothes to clean, floors to scrub, and babes to wean. Spirituals rose from the despair. 3. Fridays, there were crops to pick, trees to prune, and walls to brick. Runaway, runaway, some slaves dared. 2. Saturdays, there were beans to can, hens to pluck, and folks to fan. Freedom was slaves' ardent prayer. 1. Week in, week out, from sun to sun, always more chores to be done. And even as the plantation slept, wood was on the fire kept. But Sunday was a day of rest when master charmed the weekend guest. Slaves had off one afternoon when the law allowed them to commune. They flocked to New Orleans, Congo Square. Sundays, slaves and free met there. It was a market and a gathering ground where African music could resound. Beneath the sun in the open air, the crowd abuzz with news to share. Grouped by nation, language, tribe, they drummed ancestral roots alive. They played triangles, gourds, and bells, bonzas, flutes, fiddles, and shells. Women in gauze, silk, and percale, men in fringe and furry tails shook tambourines and shouted chants as rhythms fueled a spirited dance. They rejoiced as if they had no cares, half day, half free in Congo Square. This piece of earth was a world apart. Congo Square was freedom's heart. So that's Freedom in Congo Square, illustrated by R. Gregory Christie, and he won a Caldecott honor for that. So I think the last one is Roots and Rap. I'm not going to read. I hope you'll come in and see me inside the library. And see some of the other books that I brought with me. One of which is Unspeakable: The Tulsa Race Massacre, which an event which marked its 100th anniversary last year. It's illustrated by Floyd Cooper, and it has just really it's surprised me and really heartened me, the kind of love that book has gotten. That book has received more than 40 different awards and honors. It's unlike any other book. I've had some other books that have won multiple awards, but nothing like this. I mean, I just heard about another award yesterday, which I can't even announce yet. It's been somewhat bittersweet because Floyd Cooper, who also illustrated Becoming Billie Holiday, passed away this year. So I want to tell you just a little backstory about that book because it's very, very close to my heart. When I think it was August of 2018, I texted Floyd, and we had been trying to figure out, what we could work on. And it's just like sometimes I approach illustrators, like I approached Brian Collier about the project that we worked on together, By and By. And I like to work with illustrators on projects that will be a passion project for them, particularly when I'm working with an established illustrator like Brian Collier or Floyd Cooper. And so I approached Floyd, and we'd been kicking around ideas, and we just hadn't landed on anything and hadn't been able to sell anything for our second collaboration. And I said, we should write a book about the Tulsa Race Massacre. And I said, it should start out with Once Upon a Time. And he wrote back right away and said, OMG, I've got to do that. He said, I'm from Tulsa. And he, duh, I know, that's why I asked you to work on the project. And so I said, well, it's a go then. I said, it needs to start off. I said, it's going to start Once Upon a Time in Tulsa. And so I said, but I can't work on it until winter break because my day job is a college professor, and I try to, do new works when I'm on break. I used to. Now I just kind of do them when I can catch a minute. But anyway, I postponed it But as luck would have it, I was at a convention in Houston, and I had some time on my hands, and I had chatted with a couple friends, and they said, you really need to do that book. And so I got inspired, and I began writing Once Upon a Time in Tulsa, Once Upon a Time in Oklahoma. And I knew that there was an editor at that conference that I wanted to pitch the book to, but I really couldn't. I'm horrible with faces, so I couldn't remember what she looked like. And it was the last day of the convention. I didn't know whether their booth was going to still be in the exhibit hall. And I was sitting eating breakfast, and this woman comes up and says, do you mind if I sit with you, Carol? And I was like, sure. And it was that editor. And so I pitched the book to her over breakfast, and she said, I'd love to see it. And I hadn't even finished writing it at that point. And so that was November. And by January, we had contracts to do the book. And so that book was Floyd's next to the last book. And I understand he worked on it in a very, he was almost like a hermit. He would go in his studio and just stay for hours and hours and hours. And he poured everything into that book. I did not even know when the book came out that right around the time the book came out, he had been diagnosed with cancer. And he wasn't returning calls. And then the day before he passed away, I found out he was sick. And, they were asking for contributions and, for the family. And then the very next morning, I got Floyd passed away. And I'm like, oh my God, that's why he couldn't do the promotional tour. But he didn't want anybody to know. And he did live long enough for some of the honors that the book received, but not for the Caldecott honor, which his family's going to accept on his behalf week after next at the American Library Association. So do come in and look at Unspeakable, The Tulsa Race Massacre, and some of my other books. So I'm going to end on a high note, I hope. The Roots of Rap. This is a book that was inspired by my son and my daughter, who were fans of hip hop. So much so that I had cable taken off the television because I didn't like some of the content when they were when they were in middle school. And my daughter said she felt so deprived because she couldn't participate in like the water cooler conversations that they have at school, not only about cable, but about not only about the hip hop videos, but about some television shows. And then when we would be in the car riding along, and they'd have their CDs in the car, all of a sudden, my son would like turn the music down low. I said, Mom, you can't hear this part. It's got profanity. Like, okay. So, and then my daughter took me to a concert. I took her and her girlfriend to a concert. What was it called? Super Jam? Anyway, Super Jam? I can't hear you, but anyway, it was some kind of jam, right? And so we're at this concert. I didn't realize that they don't have bands necessarily. It was just like a DJ on the stage. I'm like, where's the band? So anyway, my kids immersed me in hip hop. I wish I had been immersed a little sooner or realized when I was writing poetry when I was in my 20s that maybe I was actually writing hip hop, because I used to write adult poetry before I wrote for kids, because then maybe my limo would be out here waiting for me. But anyway, because my kids were listening to rap music, I decided, I'm going to write a children's book about rap. And it took me about maybe close to 10 years for the publishing industry to catch up. And had it not been for the musical Hamilton, this book might not have been published, because Hamilton kind of put hip-hop on the radar of in some cultural circles where it had kind of been snubbed before. So Hamilton was on Broadway. This was on an editor's desk, and I was able to get a contract. It's illustrated by Frank Morrison, who also illustrated RESPECT and a few other books. We're working on a book now together called How Do You Spell Unfair, about a spelling bee. So I'll just read the book. Folktales, street rhymes, spirituals, rooted in spoken word. Props to poets Hughes and Dunbar, published, ain't you heard? Soul man James Brown shouting, I'm black and I'm proud, giving birth to funk, bassline pulsing loud. The origins go way back beyond old school, but it is in the 70s that rappers start to rule. Crews with cans of paint spray tags on subway trains. Writers from every borough take risks to make a name. Graffiti is thrown on buildings, bridges, and billboard signs all along the Manhattan, Queens, Bronx, and Brooklyn lines. A boombox-toting homie blast a hot track on a corner. Passers-by 4 deep surround a street performer. With sheets of cardboard for a stage, b-boys bust out moves. Donkey, spider, robot, windmill, rock, lock, spin to breakdance grooves. Jamaican DJs shouting toast, invent what's now called dub. Remix with twin turntables at soul and reggae clubs. DJ Kool Herc in the Bronx, block party under his command. Rocks and rocks, non-stop, mic clutched in his hand. Dropping, scratching, beat juggling, matching, wax on wheels of steel, wordplay, rhyming, triple timing, keeping the lyrics real. Sugar Hill Gang, Run DMC, LL Cool J, Curtis Blow, Biggie and the Fat Boys jamming on the radio. Nas, Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, Eminem, 50 Cent, Tupac 2, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5, the message ringing true. Female MCs break it down, Salt and Pepper and TLC. Queen Latifah sports a crown, reigning like royalty. All around her kingdom, shorties raised on rap, boogie to fat beats in backwards baseball caps. A generation voicing stories, hopes, and fears. Founds a hip-hop nation. Say holla if you hear. From Atlanta to Zanzibar, youth spit freestyle freedom sounds. Hip-hop is a language that's spoken the whole world round. And so that is The Roots of Rap. The entire title is 16 bars on the 4 pillars of hip-hop. And believe it or not, that's me. The illustrator took that liberty, and then we had to come up with a little tag. Each of us had to come up with a little tag. And I think my son may have actually written my tag for me. So that's all, folks. I will take some questions if you have any. Thank you so much.
Our second keynote speaker, author and illustrator Brian Collier, has taught me that the pictures used to illustrate a children's book can be not just art, but great art. When I saw Collier's illustrations for Dave the Potter, Artist, Poet, Slave, I pretty much flipped out. I wrote a column about it for the paper, and I bought a copy of the book to have Brian sign for my 4-year-old nephew. In my humble opinion, Brian Collier is a world-class artist. But don't take my word for it. Take the word of the curators at the Academy Art Museum. They've just mounted a full exhibit of his work that opens today and is going to be up through July 24th. I can hardly wait to see it. And I checked. Entrance to the museum is free today. It will be free every Friday. And it's going to be free on next Saturday, Juneteenth. So if you get a chance, yeah. Fabulous show. I can hardly wait. The list of prizes Brian Collier has received includes 4 Caldecott Honors and 6 Coretta Scott King Illustrator Awards. Books authored and or illustrated by Mr. Collier include Rosa, Martin's Big Words, The Life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and with today's other keynote speaker, Carol Boston Weatherford, By and By. Oh, I've got my mask on. Sorry. Yeah. Oops. It's better with the mask, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, well. By and By, Charles Albert Finley, the father of gospel music. Mr. Collier grew up just down the road in Pocomoke City, where, taking inspiration from his grandmother's quilts, he fell in love with drawing and painting. In 1985, in a national competition, he won a scholarship to the illustrious Pratt Institute in New York. I'd give my left arm. While attending Pratt, he began to work with young would-be artists at the Harlem Horizon Studio and Harlem Hospital Center. After graduating with honors from Pratt, he went on to serve for 12 years as the Harlem program's director. Though he now works full-time on his own artwork, and we're glad he does, he still volunteers in the Harlem program. Those are some lucky young people who get to be taught by an artist of Mr. Collier's caliber. And we're really lucky to get to hear him speak today because he's a terrific storyteller. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, a warm round of applause, please, for Brian Collier.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Everybody okay? Okay. That is true. My name is Brian Collier, and I'm an author and illustrator of picture books. And today I'm super excited to be a part of this gathering and collective of book lovers. Raise your hand if you love books. And art lovers, raise your hand if you love art. I'm in a good place today. I want to share with you a little bit about the background, and I want to share with you about some of the recent work that I'm doing. My introduction to a book was at age 4, and now here's the backdrop. My mother was a Head Start teacher, and you remember Head Start? Is it still around? It's good. And I'm the youngest of 6 kids, so she would bring books home periodically. And she brought this one book home that stuck with me, and it's an obscure book. You probably haven't heard of it. It was this book here. It was Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats, and the little boy, his name is Peter. And I was enamored with the visuals, what it looked like. And Peter, when I was 4, we looked just alike. And I remember just getting the book and flipping through the book at 4, and I stopped and froze at this page right here. Peter looking out the window at the snow, and I noticed that we looked alike. It was the first time that happened for me, and I noticed. Well, wait a minute. My pajamas are sort of like that too. Something going on here, you know. So I got this book, and I kept looking at it, and for years, I've always come back to this book for different reasons. After becoming an artist, I noticed and could appreciate the simplicity and the sophistication of Ezra Jack Keats. How he put things together, didn't use much, but he said so many things. He was like a great visual writer because it's really simple, but it's sophisticated at the same time. So over the years, I've read this book and over and over again, and I thought I knew the story until maybe 3 years ago when I looked at the book and I saw something brand new. It was a pop. It was just like a revelation that happened because I thought this book was about a kid playing in the snow. And then I realized it wasn't. It was about something else. It was about the snow, but it was about something else. So here, this is the scenario that happened. Peter puts his red jumpsuit on and he goes outside. And the story goes, crunch, crunch, crunch. His feet sank into the snow. He walked with his toes pointed out like this. He walked with his toes pointed in like that. And then the next page it said, he dragged his feet slowly and he made tracks. He saw something sticking up in the snow and he made a new track. Guess what it was? You know the story? It was a stick, good for smacking a tree, and Peter smacked the tree and the snow came down. And it plopped on his head. He's having fun in the snow. And he marched on in the snow and he came across the big kids. Remember, I'm the youngest of 6 kids. Everybody, all the little kids want to hang with the big kids. And so did Peter. But he was too small. He couldn't hang with the big kids, so he had to figure out how to have an adventure on his own. So Peter marched on and played in the snow, and he laid down and made snow angels in the snow. He made a snowman, and he crafted a snowball and put it in his pocket. And he played on, and then he went home, and he told his mother all about his great adventure that day as she was getting him ready for the tub. He got in the tub, and he thought, and he thought, and he thought, and he thought, and then he remembered, wait a minute, I got a snowball in my pocket. When I get out of this tub and get these pajamas on, I'm gonna get that snowball. But guess what happened? The snowball had melted. And then Peter went to bed that night and he had a dream. He dreamt of a hot, sticky day. But when he woke up the next day, The snow met him at the window. Forever, I thought this book was about a kid playing in the snow. That's not what he was doing. Guess what he was doing? I'll blow your mind with it. He wasn't playing in the snow. He was dream walking. He told you what he was going to do when you first looked at the cover. Look at the body gesture on Peter. Guess what he's looking at? The footprints, right? This is what I mean by dream walking. It said, early on in the book, it said, crunch, crunch, crunch. His feet sank in the snow. He walked with his toes pointed out like that and his toes pointed in like that. Look at the design. Next page, he dragged his feet slowly and he made tracks. Pay attention to the design. He saw a stick. He made a third design. He went on in the text and he laid down and made snow angels in the snow. Look at his creation. He's creating from page, and he made a snowman. He's creating from page to page. We didn't pay attention. We didn't see his feet. That's what an artist does. We dream walk. We walk from moment to moment and we create. We can't imagine what it is. It's so many different things that we could think of that we could do, but I didn't pay attention to his feet. But the cover suggested that from the very beginning, all I saw was the snow. So here's what it made me realize. With a picture book, you got to pay attention to those pictures. They're telling a story beyond the text. And as I got older and I prayed more, what if this wasn't snow? What if it was sand? Have you ever heard of footprints in the sand? Oh, Peter's doing it. Now it went to a different level, didn't it? It changed. I mean, it took me 40 years, over 40 years to see the sophistication that Ezra Jack Keith was putting in a book. A simple picture book. Simple as snow, it's snow play. We can all relate. But it says so much more. And then I said, okay, hold on. These kids are gonna think I'm off my bonkers when I talk about this dream walking thing. So I got the other book that I got when I was 4 years old, and it was Harold and the Purple Crayon. Now, when I was a little boy, I had an afro. And I still related to Harold. But the older I got, I started to look more like Harold, didn't I? I mean, you would see, if I came up here in a jumper, you would see it. Old Harold up here doing it. So Harold did the same thing. He stepped out on a blank sheet of paper. Well, he did this first. All kids do that first, right? On your walls. But he straightened it out and he drew the horizon line. And he reached up and he hung the moon in the sky. And he drew a pathway, a walkway, and he went for a walk with the purple crayon. And then he got bored. He said, I want to walk a new way. So he stepped off the path and walked a new way. And he stopped. He said, right here, right now, this is a great place for a forest. In my forest, it'll be one tree. And with the purple crayon, he drew one apple tree. And he drew a dragon to guard the forest. He drew the dragon with big eyes and big teeth. He drew it so well, he became frightened, and Harold fell backwards with the crayon. He couldn't believe it. But pay attention to the crayon. It made these little waves. I bet you can't guess what happened next. Those waves became an ocean, and Harold fell in the ocean. Guess what he did next? What would you do? Draw a boat. And he drew a sail. And he sailed on with the moon that he hung in the sky. He sailed on, and then he said, wait a minute, this is a great place for a shore. So he drew like the beach. He drew an anchor, he dropped it, and he stopped. And on that beach, he drew a blanket. And on that blanket, he drew 9 different kinds of pies. Lunchtime. Oh, he couldn't eat them all. He tried, but he couldn't eat them all. So he drew a porcupine and a moose to help him eat those pies. And then Harold said, I need to see further down the road. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna draw a mountain or a hill. So he drew the mountain. Oh my goodness, he drew the mountain. And he drew it and he looked over so he could see further. But guess what happened? He got too close to the edge and he fell. Harold fell with that purple crayon. He fell in midair. I bet you can't guess what he did next. Somebody said a parachute? Great guess, but that's not it. What would you do? Hot air, who said that? They read the book. He drew a hot air balloon. Now, inside, I did a book called Trombone Shorty. And Trombone Shorty traveled from New Orleans to Harlem to Paris and back, spreading the good news about his music. Guess how he traveled? In a hot air balloon, because 40 years later, I was doing that book. And I said, wait a minute, that's Harold. That's our book. Stay with you and keep transforming themselves and using those ideas from century and time over and over and over again. You can never outgrow a picture book. No matter how many degrees you get or how many Caldecott awards you win, you can't do it. It's too big. You can't get bigger than this. That's amazing to me. So I thought this book was about a kid playing with a crayon, but that's not what he was doing. After 40 years of reading the book, I realized he was dream walking. He was creating from place to place. All he had was a crayon, and he took you on a journey. And the journey at the end was so satisfying and so amazing. Everywhere he went with that crayon, he started to draw these. This is how I really got excited. He was drawing all these windows and buildings. It looked like New York City. And when I was 4, I had never been to New York City. But I said, look at all those buildings and all those windows. And he kept drawing them. And he drew one window. And he climbed in the window. And in the window was his bed that he drew. And he got in the bed and the crayon hit the floor. And I realized Harold was trying to get home the whole time. That's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to locate home base all the time. So, it's amazing, this journey of picture books and storytelling, how those big themes resonate so deeply as the older we get. And that's what's exciting about being a part of making books for me. So, I know it's exciting. No, it's okay. I was about to duck, but it's okay. So here's my journey into being in publishing. I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, and I graduated. And one day I was in Barnes & Noble in Manhattan, and I was in the picture book section, and I looked around. And it reminded me of my childhood. And I said, wait a minute, I looked at the books and I didn't see any books that looked like me. I didn't see Harold. I didn't see Peter from Snowy Day. I said, wait a minute, I can make some books. Maybe I should tell some stories and have the pictures of black and brown kids and tell the stories and let them see themselves like I saw myself when I was a little boy. So I said, okay, I'm gonna make a book. I'm an artist, I'm gonna make a book. I jotted down the names of some publishers, and in Manhattan, they were all there. So I went to one publisher the next week with my portfolio of artwork. And I said, I want to make books. Guess what they said? They said no. I went to a different publishing house the next week. I want to make books. Guess what they said? No. The third week I went to a different publishing house. No. And I kept finding all these publishing houses, and every week, once a week, I went to a different publishing house. Over and over again. Some of them, I repeated some of them. But I went to nearly all of them in New York City. And I went once a week, every week for 7 years. And they said no. But then one day somebody said yes. They saw me coming. Eventually I knew I could make a book. I didn't expect to do 7 years of going door to door to every publisher in New York City with a portfolio, but eventually I knew I could make a book if I got a shot at it. And luckily I did. I did a book called Uptown, and I wrote and illustrated that book. And I was channeling Peter, and I was channeling Harold. It was a little boy, my nephew, who starred in the book. He walked from one end of Harlem to the other, talking about all the greatest things that he likes about his neighborhood. And it was in my mind, that's who was swirling. It was Peter and Snowy. So that's the power of picture books. And I went on. Once I got the taste of being able to publish a book, I had to re-educate myself about what I thought I knew. I did a book called Martin's Big Words and Rosa Parks, written by Nikki Giovanni, and it allowed me to go down and do research. Even though the book is written, the illustrator, I think, really has to do research as well to vet what you're actually portraying visually. So it afforded me the opportunity to go down to visit the historical sites in Atlanta, Dr. King's childhood, go to Montgomery, Alabama, to Dexter Baptist Church, to Selma, and go to Mrs. Parks, where, I thought I had an ideal in my mind about where she lived or what kind of house she lived in Montgomery, Alabama. And I was astounded to know that she lived in the projects in Montgomery, a project apartment building. But then that informs history, because her back door opened to the front door of E.D. Nixon, president of NAACP, former Pullman Porter. When you say Pullman Porter, you're talking about a community organizer and a traveler and a source of information. That informs history. Also, 1955, during the bus boycott, everybody rode the bus in the project. So if you get on the bus with the same people every day and something happens on the bus, a lot of your neighbors know. So the news travels better, where you can organize and gather. So it informed how the bus boycott really got started. It informed how the community got galvanized around the issue and how change, the agent of change, happens, or it happened then. And now the marches and the protests and all this stuff happened. How all it takes is a spark. And going there, see, this was the setup. When I got a chance to work with Nikki Giovanni and she wrote Rosa, Nikki knew Mrs. Parks. Mrs. Parks was still with us, and she was going to do a tour with us. She was going to travel on the road. We were going to do book signings all over the country with her book. And that's all I needed. I didn't even need a contract after that, That's all I wanted. And we did the book. She saw some of the artwork. She saw all of the artwork before it was published. Mrs. Parks did. And but she passed away 2 weeks after the book was published. So we didn't get a chance to do that tour. But I was so happy that she got a chance to see the artwork. And with the Martin's Big Words story, I had breakfast with Mrs. King. That was a big deal. And I talked with so many people that marched with Dr. King. When you get to talk the history up close, you get a whole different appreciation, and you see it in a very, very different way. When I sat at Dr. King's desk in his office in Dexter Baptist Church, which they never changed any of the decor, it's still the same as when he was there in 1955. You get a different appreciation for it. So that's what some of the luxuries of being to illustrate a book is for me. And then I discovered new history. Please tell me, who's heard of Dave the Potter? Oh, okay. When I did the book, I had never heard of Dave the Potter before. It's written by Laban Carrick-Hill, the author, and he said he got the story. He was watching the Antique Roadshow on TV, and a pot came up made by Dave, and he was laying on the couch, and he stood up. He said, I'm writing about that right there. And he wrote this story. And I had never heard of it. And it wasn't much that I could research online about it either. I mean, I saw some of the pots, but I knew I had to see the pots up close. So I took a trip down to South Carolina, Edgefield, South Carolina, where Dave was a slave on a plantation 200 years ago. And this plantation didn't pick cotton, they made clay pots. And they sold these clay pots to different farms and plantations in the area and around the country. They stored their meat, grain, water, and oil in. And this is how the story goes. Laban Carrick-Hill, here's what he said. To us, it's just dirt, the ground you walk on. Scoop up a handful, the gritty grain slip between your fingers. On wet days heavy with rainwater, it's cool and squishy, mud pie heaven. But to Dave, it was clay, the plain and basic stuff upon which he learned to form a life as a slave nearly 200 years ago. To us, it's just a pot, round and tall, good for keeping marbles or fresh cut flowers. But to Dave, it was a pot, large enough to store a season's grain harvest, to put up salted meat, and to hold memories. Each one began out of a cloud of dust. Clotted clumps of clay ground at the pug mill carried wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow to Dave's spinning potter's wheel. And with a flat wooden paddle large enough to row across the Atlantic, Dave mixed the clay with water drawn from the Big Horse Creek until wet, stiff, and heavy. He threw the clay, sometimes 60 pounds at once. Nobody knew how or where it would land except Dave. Dave kicked his potter's wheel until it spun as fast as a carnival's wheel of fortune. And like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat, Dave's hands buried into the mounted mud, and he pulled out the shape of a jar. His chapped thumbs pinched into the center. He squeezed the insides against his fingers on the outside. The wheel spun round and round as the walls rose up like a robin's puffed breast, but only so far before its immense weight threatened collapse. The jar grew so large, Dave could no longer wrap his strong arms around it. If he climbed into the jar and curled up into a ball, he would have been embraced. Only then did he stop his potter's wheel and rolled long ropes of clay between his dried and caked palms. Stay with me, we're almost there. Dave mounted these coils one by one on the half-finished jar. He ran his wet fingers along the side, smoothing it all together, kicking the wheel with the heel of his foot. The shoulders and rim shrugged upward as the jar took shape. Dave knew it was there even before he worked the raw mound on his wheel. While the clay dried, Dave pounded wood ash and sand to mix a glass-like brown glaze to withstand time. But before the jar completely hardened, Dave picked up a stick. He wrote to let us know he was here. He wrote, I wonder where is all my relations, friendship to all in every nation. He signed it Dave, August 16th, 1857. And inside you see pictures of some of Dave's actual pots. Now, to appreciate the story, it was illegal for slaves to read and write. If they were caught doing so, great harm would come to them, even death. But Dave risked it all. I said, wait a minute. Dave made, I found out he made over 40,000 pots in his lifetime. I found out he was bought and sold 6 different times in South Carolina to different plantations. And then I found out something that was astounding. They said, he lost a leg in a train accident. I said, well, I have 2 questions. How does a slave survive an amputation of a leg? No doctor, no hospital, no painkiller. 2, who kicked the wheel? You can't make pottery with 1 leg. They said, they brought another slave in that lost his arms to kick the wheel. I was like, wow. I said, but he made over 40,000 pots. It was illegal for slaves to read and write. How did he learn to read, and how did he get away with it? Well, one plantation that he was on, he was a newspaper typesetter. Somebody there taught him how to read. He was later sold to a plantation and trained to be a master potter. He put the art together and started writing poetry. And he wrote, I wonder where's all my relations, friendship to all in every nation. How was he talking about another nation when he was born and died in Edgefield, South Carolina? He never went to another nation. He never went to another county. What's the power of literacy? The book is about poetry and pottery, and American history and slavery, but it's about literacy. If you can read and write, you can't be bound, not even shackles. You can't be bound. You can talk about anything. You can talk about Mars. You don't have to go there. That's what I celebrate. And when he wrote these poems, he wasn't writing for his contemporaries. He was writing for us, the future. That's what blows me away about art and the artistry. It jumps a level. It goes to a different place to be able to survive time. New history. Didn't even know it existed. They found the pots in people's front yards. I said I was going to buy one when I went down there. And then they told me. I said, well, just give me a little jar. Well, a little jar started at $175,000 each. And the 40-gallon jars, $1.5 million starting, if you can buy one now. It was never meant to be high art, but what it was meant to be is to be spoken about and celebrated about. And that's what we're doing with Dave the Potter. All right. Thank you. So here's the latest book that I did. I wrote and illustrated the book. I wrote it at the very beginning of the pandemic, where everything was locked down, and my wife and I were home with our kids. Every family was home with their kids, doing virtual school and all that stuff. I have 3 daughters. As you can see, this book has boys in it. I gave them boy haircuts for the book. So my daughters actually posed for these books, but they're boys in the book. It's called Music is a Rainbow. And it wasn't supposed to be that. I was really supposed to illustrate the poem by Robert Frost, A Road Not Taken. And I was on that journey. I was doing storyboards for it. And then the format of the poem didn't meet the format of making a picture book, so you get stuck. It's basically you come to a fork in the road and you make a choice. And you take that choice of going that way and you reminisce about what it would be like if you went the other way, and you come back around back to the point in which you started. Somehow in my mind I couldn't figure that out, but I still used some of the color signatures alluded in A Road Not Taken. And then I thought about the childhood of Quincy Jones, him growing up on the south side of Chicago in the 40s. And if that's not complicated enough, I said, I'll take the phrase that was adapted by Maya Angelou, and God put a rainbow in the cloud. So I combined those three ideas to make the rain start. No. So here's the story. Music is a rainbow. It's early morning, the only alone time the boy had with his father. He would watch his daddy read the newspaper and sip his cup of coffee. Daddy would always pretend to be surprised when he caught sight of the boy in the doorway, but of course he knew he was there the whole entire time. Every morning, Daddy called his son over. He pressed 2 quarters in his hand and gave him a hug and whispered a prayer in his ear. Let's see, what page was that on? Okay. And he said, son, life is full of holes. You may want to close them up to keep out the storm, but make sure you leave room for the rainbow to find you. Broken is beautiful. Every morning, the boy would watch his father leave for work. And every morning, this is what it felt like. The boy loved time with his mother, too. Every day, his mama beamed with joy as she pressed away the wrinkles from his clothes. She would kiss him 2 times on the forehead and rub oil on his face until he shined as bright as the sun. Mama's love was sweet, sweet like penny candy. But on his 7th birthday, something went wrong. Mama got sick, and Daddy said she had to go away for just a while. And this is what it felt like to the boy. Now the boy sat alone in the dark, and then he heard it, music coming from behind the pictures hanging on the wall. And suddenly the boy could relax. In the blue and greens, he could shine in the yellow and reds, and he could dream in the purple and the pinks. And like his daddy's hugs and his mama's kisses on his forehead, music was a rainbow. It was a rainbow of love. But that feeling didn't last for long, because his friends were outside waiting to get into trouble. He has to make a decision. Known on the street as the South Side Bandits, they would sneak into ice cream trucks and go joyriding. They were eager to get into more mischief. But soon he discovered the movie theater, and something in his head and his heart said, stop. And he did. Got to make a choice. Now the boy sat alone in the theater in the dark. He loved the smell of buttery popcorn. The movie began and the music started too. The boy closed his eyes and he saw purple, red, yellow, and green light that chased away all the darkness. The boy could relax, he could shine, and he could dream. And music was love, love like his daddy's hugs and his mama's kisses on the forehead. But that feeling didn't last for long either. And one day, bored and hungry, he and his boys got an idea. They broke into a rec center through a half-open window in the alleyway. Now, with no real plan, they just ran and ripped from one room to the other, until someone discovered the pantry cupboard where all the goodies were stored. Food fight. We're almost there. But then the boy found a room with a piano in it, and something in his head and in his heart said, stop. And he did. On the piano, he hit one white key, and then he hit all the white keys. And one by one, he hit all the black keys too, loving the sound that each key made. He then combined the sound by running his fingers from the highest to the softest notes like his mother's voice, to the lowest and deepest notes like his daddy's voice. The boy could relax, he could shine, and he could dream. And guess what? And the boy remembered to what his daddy told him. He said, son, life is full of holes. You may want to close them up to keep out the storm, but make sure you leave room for the rainbow. Broken is beautiful. And as the boy continued to play, the sounds vibrated through his body. The sounds became music, and the music changed into colors. The rainbow found him. And that, my friends, lasted forever. Well, listen, come on in. Carol's involved. Other authors all around. Come in and check us out and see what we do, see what we actually do. So thank you for your time.